So I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody on this lunch hour. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Angela Olson. I am the Studio Programs Associate at MIA, the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Joining you today from Bide Otunwe, which means Minneapolis in the Dakota language. This is the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Dakota, Anishinaabe, and Ho-Chunk nations. So I want to make sure to mention and honor that's where we're joining you from today. Today we're really excited to have Aparna Ramaswamy from Ragamala Dance Company joining us today with Pujan Gandhi, our Jane Emison Assistant Curator of South and Southeast Asian Art, to have a little conversation today to kind of lead you through the Dance of Shiva performance that was filmed right in Mia's galleries. So the chat function is open. Please feel free to keep the discussion going. I'll kind of be monitoring that as it goes on. Towards the end at about 12:40-ish, we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So you'll be able to ask questions directly to Pujan and Aparna. So I'll also be putting a couple links in the chat to keep you updated on what's coming up next for Aparna and Ragamala, as well as a link to the exhibition page on Mia's website as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and go dark and I'll pass it on to you, Pujan.
All right, thanks so much, Angela. And also thanks to everyone at Mia Films, Molly Lax, for putting this Zoom event together for this, what I hope will be a delightful and potentially auspicious lunch break for everyone. And also, of course, to thank Aparna Ramaswamy, the co-artistic director of Ragamala Dance Company, who I actually knew of before coming to Minneapolis. They've performed internationally, won many awards, and are sort of at the fore of bringing Bharatanatyam, this South Indian dance form, into the sort of contemporary discourse. And more specifically, the dance company has had a strong relationship with Mia since probably the 80s. And just last year, we were able, or 2019, we were able to invite Aparna's guru, Alarmel Valli, to the museum to discuss many tenets of South Asian dance, which you could see online now. And it's been a wonderful sort of collaboration. And the impetus for this specific performance was the reinstallation of the South and Southeast Asian galleries, which opened last October, which I hope you'll all be able to go. And more specifically, our Chola bronze sculpture of Shiva Nataraja, 10th, 11th century sculpture of Shiva Nataraja that's been at the museum since 1929, that on the occasion of the reinstallation, we were able to conserve both for critical stability and to be able to see details, you know, like the river goddess Ganga being caught in Shiva's hair. Angela, I think we'll present, you have a link there that sort of tells you more about that project. So that was sort of the impetus of this, and we were able to film it in the galleries and present it to you today. So Aparna, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Well, I just will add my thanks to you, Pujan, and the entire staff at MIA who was part of this project for this invitation. It's been really exciting to conceive of this project. We've been talking about this for a long time, but generally since you came to MIA, we've had a very dynamic relationship. We've had other partnerships, like you mentioned, with my guru and other events. And then we've been talking about this, and the shape of this event has really changed because of COVID. So I'm just so happy that we could make it happen and make it as robust, I think, as it feels. So thank you so much. And it was just truly an honor to be dancing in the gallery in this private, I would say, private showing in the what felt like the sannidhi or the inner sanctum of the temple.
The honor was ours. So thank you. And I think without further ado, let's watch. Wow. Thank you. That was brought back memories of being actually in the gallery with the stones and you dancing. And so that was just wonderful. I wanted to sort of start off by sort of linking sculpture and art history to dance, because in Indian culture, it's all related in many aesthetic treatises. And so I thought it would be an opportunity to flesh that out a bit. And in terms of the image of Shiva as Lord of the Dance, we go about a variety of approaches of figuring out what forces inflect form. So we look at a lot of devotional poetry. We'll send a link now with other Chola bronzes and other images that are in the gallery. And you have, descriptions by Sambandar describing Uma as having her flawless gait, which mocks the peacock's grace, feet as soft as cotton down. You have similar sort of riveting images of Shiva Nataraja, of Shiva dancing the world in and out of existence. And also, and a lot of work by Vidya Dehejia has looked at the proliferation of the icon, and it was really a 10th century Chola queen that started really patronizing these sculptors. And throughout time, and even actually more so after the colonial period, the image of Shiva Nataraja became further popularized also by people like Ananda Kumaraswamy, who wrote an essay called The Dance of Shiva, and was a curator at the MFA Boston and starting in 1918. So I was wondering if what your approach to sort of the historiography of the medium would be or is, and what does it mean to be sort of in the field today, as it were?
That's a big question. I'm going to approach, so what I'll start doing, I think, is give you just the history in a nutshell as it relates to what you were talking about. So in relation to that idea of bhakti and poetry. So Bharatanatyam, let me actually back up. So the history of dance in India goes back to mythological times, 2 millennia ago. And dance was created by the gods, they say, for the enjoyment of the masses. And so when creating dance, they took from the 4 Vedas or scriptures, they took song, words, sentiment, gesture, and made the 5th Veda or Natya Veda, which is dance. Now, dance as one form, as it is still done today, was spread throughout India through an oral tradition. And so the cultural specificities of each region were absorbed, and dance became 6 classical styles. So Bharatanatyam is the classical form from the southeastern region of India, from the state of Tamil Nadu, where my family is from. For many centuries, dance was performed exclusively in the temples, and they were performed as a vital part of ritual and worship. And so the dancer served as the medium between the people and the gods. And her task was not at all of one of entertainment, but rather to transport the audience and to share a space of wonder and of bliss. And so when we think about the interconnection of the different art forms, and like you said, each one is inspired by the other: music, dance, sculpture, visual art. And there's so much that we have been influenced by the you were talking about the spiritual poetry, the devotional poetry, and it affects the devotional landscape even today, because so much of our themes and our work are based in this devotional tradition. But the idea, the Hindu idea that when One is in front of a statue in a temple. It is the literal embodiment of the divine. So when the worshiper comes before the statue and sees the statue, the worshiper feels seen by the statue, that idea of darshanam, or two-way communication. And then the divine energy that's inherent in that statue comes alive, and God is present in that moment. And so I don't feel that we need to relegate the history and the present. That idea of the divine being present and us having spiritual inspiration in our work feels very current to me. It felt current to me in that moment when I was dancing in the gallery, and it is current through all the work that we do and that we create. I don't know if I answered your question, Pujan, but.
No, I think that's good. I mean, it's the role of the artist to sort of pluck the eternal. And these sculptures were also 1,000 years old and yet still move us today. And I think that dance in some ways brings that even further to the fore. And I thought maybe, I think that's very helpful. I thought maybe we can go back to the performance itself. And if you don't mind, one of the things we do is sort of this iconographical analysis to sort of help elucidate certain themes. And so I thought it would be helpful to just go back and sort of bring aspects of it to sort of more literal terms. And again, we're talking about Shiva, who is probably the most beguiling and complex of all Hindu gods, the lord of creation and destruction, an aesthetic, a family man, you know, all powerful. And from my interpretation, I would be curious about what the dancer's interpretation of that force is, and how do you act, how is that intermediary relationship possible? So let's maybe go back to a clip. So I think at the 4-minute. Is that good? Yeah, I think we can. So, so what was happening there?
What was happening? So in this piece, Shankara Sri Giri, which was choreographed by my guru, the song was written in the 19th century. And so the song itself, obviously, as you were saying, it's a prayer, it's an homage to Lord Shiva in his form as Nataraja, the king of dance. So he has a multitude of forms, but in his, and Shiva is known, as you said, dancing the world into existence, destruction, and regeneration. So as in his dance, the Tandava, he is said to have many different types of Tandava. This one is of rage, one is of destruction, one happens in the evening, one is of grace. This one is called the Ananda Tandava, or the dance of bliss. And so when he's that bliss is spiritual bliss, to where he's leading his followers. So in this piece, I go back and forth between showing the iconography, the symbols. As you said, everyone is very interested. Indian artistic traditions are filled with symbols. So when I describe, and do you want me to talk to you about the gestures? I will do that. Do you want me to go through quickly, Pujan?
Sure, just the key ones. I noticed, for example, the idea of the eyes.
I'll get to that. So exactly.
Yeah.
So Shiva, if you can see, my hands are not on the screen, but Shiva, his many hands. So one, this is the Abhaya Mudra, which blesses. The other hand is showing his the path to salvation. It's pointing at his uplifted leg. The Damaru, which is the rattle drum, the small drum, is the sound of creation and time, syncopated. The fire is in his left hand, the fire of destruction and regeneration. So in that clip we saw, he is described, you said he is an ascetic. He is described, his body is covered in holy ash. His third eye, his three eyes, so his third eye is the eye of wisdom. And when it opens, it destroys. What does it destroy? It destroys Maya, or illusion. He wears skulls around his neck. So again, as you said, Shiva is many and all things. So he dances in the temple. He dances in the cremation ground. So in this, I say, when he does this, he dances with the Buddhaganam, which are the spirits of the cremation ground. And together they dance joyfully. And then I go on to say Shankara Srigiri, he is the Lord of the mountain. I describe him with Ganga flowing, as you said, nestled in his locks. He controlled her force with his hair, his tresses that reached the ends of the universe. At the same time, I am also the devotee. So I go back and forth between showing him being the devotee. So in these moments, I am the devotee. There are moments when I am dancing as Shiva, and then there are moments when I'm seeing him dance as Shiva.
Wow. So you also have to have this equal amount of sort of ambivalence and of all things to sort of oscillate between devotee and vessel in some ways, or an interpretation.
Yeah, what I wouldn't call it ambivalence. I would call it spontaneity, because there are moments where, again, you are shifting, and we are all as humans shifting, but when you're one person showing two different things, you also need to really be the connector between those things, and you have to effectively show that relationship between the bhakta, the devotee, and the divine.
Well, I think that's sort of the charge of a lot of sculptors and painters and sort of all artists, and sort of bringing out that spiritual force. And in all these nuances and every sort of gesture, I was seeing a lot of this sort of principle called rasa, which is the emotive essence, meaning that you take the viewer, you take someone to a more abstract place to appreciate a more sort of transcendent state. And it requires a knowledgeable audience, but it's about figuring out different emotional states and all of those ways that the divine can be. So I was sort of thinking about the emotions, and maybe we could look at another clip and sort of explore that idea.
Absolutely.
Great. So that was, I mean, just from our conversation before, I was really able to appreciate that oscillation between devotee and dance. And one of the things that I think struck me about that going through was perhaps it's towards the end of the performance, or but your facial expressions really sort of came out, and there was a joy in your expression. So I was wondering if that's a sort of correct or interpretation, or what was happening sort of in that moment.
Sure. So in that section, I am describing Shiva Nataraja as the embodiment of melody and rhythm. And so then that line repeats over and over and over and over again, punctuated with these rhythmic sections. And so when you are able to repeat a line over and over, you can show it in different ways. So I can show the different instruments. So I, maybe show a veena, or I'm showing the rhythm that's placed, or then I'm experiencing it, where I'm showing the sound, or I'm seeing it in the present moment, where I can see his dance in front of me. And then when I dance the various sections, what's really beautiful, so there's many things about this segment that I can talk about Bharatanatyam. So first of all, Bharatanatyam is traditionally a solo form. So in a solo form, that direct communication, that communication of bhava and the hope for the rasa that's the resulting in the audience, that is clear, that connection is direct, and your communication with the divine is direct. And so what that also does, that it allows the performer, the dancer, I should say, to really express her own personality. And so, yes, we're telling a story. Yes, we are saying a prayer. Yes, we are describing. But each of us as human beings have our own way that we express. We have our own way that we speak, our cadence, our movement. Some of us are more expressive than others. Some of us we each have our own personalities. And what I love about Bharatanatyam is that you must bring your interpretation, yourself, to that interpretation, so it becomes truthful and it becomes genuine. You must stay true to what you are expressing and how. If I feel like being very, very feminine and I'm describing Shiva's dance, that will not work. But if I am completely immersed in the beauty of the music, the complexity of the rhythm, and I'm loving the choreography and I'm feeling in the moment, I can show that in my dance at appropriate times. I love that freedom. And I think that's what makes this form that has these ancient origins so spontaneous and living within each of its practitioners, because each of us brings it alive in each moment.
Well, you certainly did that. Thank you. That was, at this point, maybe we could open it up to sort of questions. One, before we go, I would like to, if your story, how did you get involved in dance? What have been some challenges or triumphs along the way? That was just sort of a general question I have, but we should open it up to the audience as well.
Okay, shall I try to answer that, or do you want me to wait and answer that?
Sure, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, as you or many people who are with us today may know, I work in a very close partnership with my mother, Rani Ramaswamy, and we are co-directors of Ragamala Dance Company. And so my mother had been dancing as a young person, and then when we moved to Minnesota as immigrants from India, she started teaching dance in the Indian community, and I studied with her. When I was maybe 8 or 9, my teacher came to the University of Minnesota, and it was just the most fortuitous moment in my life. And my mother and I took an intensive workshop from her, and that's when our relationship started. It continues to this day, it grows to this day, and I spend a good part of every year in India with my mother and my sister, but studying with Alarmel and Valli, and really growing my understanding of the form. And as I grew my understanding of the form it keeps becoming clear to me that the form is an infinite ocean, and so we all are one small part of it. And it's fascinating, and I think that's what makes this journey so exciting, and especially creating work here in the United States for both Indian audiences, but for non-Indian audiences and in mainstream theaters, bringing concepts from our Hindu Indian background or our South Indian background, and the immersive artistic traditions, but really creating these large scale pieces and working with musicians and dancers for different projects in different ways to really share this beautiful art form here in this country in a way that feels very current and relevant and very just a paradigm for, I would say, the immigrant experience.
Thank you. And your next performance, you're working on a performance called Fires of Varanasi, which I think might include some cremation ground imagery.
May create May, yes, exactly. But it focuses on Shiva as the reigning deity of Varanasi, but really this idea of the birth, death, rebirth cycle and philosophy in Hindu thought, but how mortality can also fuel resilience and hope, and how it can lead us to leading lives filled with meaning. But spiritual transcendence is the overarching bhava.
Okay, got it. So are there questions, Angela?
Yeah, I've got some questions in our Q&As. That was so beautiful, Aparna. It was so great to watch the video and just to hear y'all talk about it. So thank you so much for that. Oh, sorry, my dog is joining us. So the first question that came up in the Q&A is probably a quick one, but just if you could reiterate the name of the Shiva consort, the Queen of the Dance. That came up a couple of times.
Well, Shiva, actually, it's Uma or it's Parvati. There's many names for Shiva's consort, and I really haven't heard her sort of necessarily described as Queen of the Dance. But they're co-generators of the universe in a lot of ways, in this way of duality, of this sort of dual sex genesis. So you often see Parvati or Uma in very graceful poses and beautiful ways, but I haven't seen images of her necessarily dancing independently. So that's I don't know, how do you tackle that issue in your practice?
What I would add to that is that just like Shiva, Parvati, or Shakti, the embodiment of female energy, is many and all things. So she is the mother goddess. She is also erotic. She is fearsome. She is a destroyer. So she is all of those things. And so to match Shiva's Tandava, her dance is Lasya, which is the graceful dance. And so we often have pieces about Devi that are an ode to all of her aspects and this idea of her as this mother figure, and in all that means.
So I've just sent a link to a work in the collection that might elucidate that relationship more.
I will put it in the chat right now for everyone to see. So another question that came up about your practice, Aparna, is do you also portray some other legends in the dance? And one of the examples was maybe the 10 incarnations of Vishnu.
What is the question? I mean, definitely we have pieces about the 10 incarnations of Vishnu. We have pieces that really run the mythological gamut. But what's the question? I mean,
I think the question is about this dance, if you're portraying any other legends.
Oh, no. No, this piece is very, very focused on this, on the Shiva Nataraja in this aspect.
It's Shaivite.
Great. And then another question that we have is, can you tell us something about the music? Are there several songs tied together, or is this a piece of music used for the entire dance? And then what was the process of selecting the music? So was it the choreographer? Was it you, the dancer? If you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely, I can. So this piece is one piece of music. It was written by a composer, like I said, in the 1900s. The composer is Maharaja Swathi Tirunal, who was a king from the state of Kerala, and he was a prolific composer. I think he composed 400 songs by the time he died when he was 34 or something. And he came from a very educated family in music and Sanskrit. And so he wrote this song with all of the lyrics. Now, song, so in the music, you hear a voice, obviously, then you hear vocal percussion. The vocal percussion was done by my teacher, who usually conducts a performance for a student or disciple. You hear a two-headed drum from South India called the mridangam, which we use, and then you hear a violin and a flute. That is the standard accompaniment, traditional accompaniment for a Bharatanatyam performance, really bringing out and drawing out all of the melodic and rhythmic interpretations and nuances. Almost always, I mean, I would say traditionally, but even we almost always perform with live music. So you can have a spontaneous relationship and reactions with the musicians, and it makes the performance very exciting, very full, very beautiful that you're having this conversation, dynamic conversation in a space together. Now, while the song was written 200 years ago, all of the rhythmic structures were created by my teacher. And so when you hear, I mean, the song is the song in a 8-beat meter, but all of the rhythms within each line, the number of repetitions, which part of the line is repeated, all of the rhythmic structures in the dance. So in that portion we saw recently, the rhythmic structures that punctuate that section are in 3s, 4s, 7s, 5s, and 9s. And that's done to make sure that orally we are stimulated. We really feel that range of universal rhythm. And it is very complex also for the composer and for the dancer to do that. My teacher is a master, and her choreography is beautiful. I feel so lucky to do it. Not everyone choreographs in the same way. Different schools have different principles, different choreographers. Each choreographer will handle this song differently. And so I have to say that when I was a young person, we saw her perform this piece. And so I did a few years ago request that she teach us this piece. And I'm sure it's different than the way she did it, but she created this for us, and it just turned out really beautifully. So the choreography, I would say, and the music.
Great, wonderful. So another question that came up is, you talked about dancing the world in and out of existence. And someone's just asking if you can talk a little bit more about that, where that shows up in this piece, what that kind of means. It's quite an idea, they said. So just if there's a little more you want to say about that.
Yeah, Pujan, you want to talk about it, and then I'll talk
Sure.
about the.
I mean, I think anytime you try to encapsulate Shiva in such a way, you'll grasp it and then be lost again, and grasp it and be lost again. There was a great exhibition called Manifestations of Shiva that was done in the 80s that talked about sort of how, there's the idea of, Shiva is actually considered, an ascetic to such a point that he can sort of maintain constant bliss without spilling his seed. And then that seed is sort of the rise of the universe. But then there's other stories where he destroys it. And then there's other ways of thinking about him in relationship with Shakti, these sort of immanent forces. So I would just sort of suggest sort of approaching it sort of more holistically, because I think if you try to break it apart, it's difficult. And I think the point is that it's supposed to be unfathomable. I mean, it is the awesome. And that sort of emanates in the sculpture, it emanates in the dance, it emanates in the literature that sort of affirms and negates and affirms and negates. And I think that way of non-dualistic and non-dualistic thinking is sort of the underpinning of that, and sort of coming to the terms with the idea of this, you could join this oneness that is everything, and that we're all part of this oneness is sort of the overarching theme. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's beautifully put. I mean, I think it's meant to be elusive. It's not meant to be understandable. I would say that it's the idea of dancing into existence, dancing into destruction. What it feels like is that it's not about ourselves and our ego. It's about something much bigger and broader than ourselves, and understanding that it is our humility and our kind of search for grace, that seeking is really what we are all meant to do, rather than understand and master and tackle. And I would say that the idea of destruction, creation, destruction, isn't destruction always of evil? I mean, that's the cycle of life. And so to really, again, just feel like that mortality is important. And depending on what your belief system is, the idea of reincarnation, and then that leads to karma and dharma and your actions. Everything is about how do we act as humans in the world, and that we are not in control of, we are in control of certain things, and we're not in control of certain things. So I think it's to really inspire all of that. And Shiva, he definitely has his moments of anger and rage, and then but he is present everywhere for many purposes. And I think that's important for us to kind of just accept the awesomeness of that.
I love that answer. It's really lovely to hear. I think we have time for one more question, if that's all right with y'all. So this question is maybe is bigger than what we have time for, but maybe we can kind of get into it. This person is just wondering if there is a relationship, or if you want to talk a little bit more about the relationship between the mudras in historical and contemporary Indian sculpture, and as they are expressed through this dance, or through dance.
You want to start?
Well, I mean, I think just going through, there's so much resonance. I mean, I think some things are very clear in the tambura, that you see very explicitly in the sculpture. Some things are more subtle, the grace, the sway that you have. But again, iconographies have shifted over time. And we're looking at a very specific 10th century moment, but iconographies are you have core ideas, and then the sculptor, the artist, always has interpretive freedom, often in concert with the patron. That would be sort of my sort of art historical assessment. But I don't know if in Bharatanatyam you'd say.
No, that's so in Bharatanatyam we have so these hand gestures, so mudras. So mudras are gestures, and then when they're in use, we call them hastas. And so we have 28 single-handed and 24 double-handed gestures. It's funny, so in this conversation, we've really kind of kept it metaphysical and thematic. We haven't talked too much about the technique. But in the technique of Bharatanatyam, we have this practice of gestures. And the gestures are very important in that they're very specific. They are not word to word. They convey ideas. So they do not link one after the other. Again, they're symbolic. They can be literal, but they not always, oftentimes not. But one must do them properly, but they do not substitute for the words, the intent, the poem. They're not a language unto themselves. And so they work in concert with the body, the face, the sentiment, the costume, the setting, the music, all together. They're one part of the way that we express. And so those moments in sculpture, I mean, obviously, if we're thinking about deities in sculpture, they are iconography, significantly each of them. We often move into it. So we take those frozen moments and we can live it. Yeah. But when we're portraying dance or rhythmic dance or abstract dance, there's many things that many different ways, which you see in frozen moments in certain sculptural traditions. But so they have different purposes and different ways that they're expressed, I would say. I know it's a bigger question, running out of time, but I'm hoping that's helpful.
Wonderful. Well, it is just about 1 o'clock, so I want to make sure that we end this webinar on time. But thank you so much, Aparna, for sharing your work with us, and Pujan for helping us kind of have this conversation and understand it. Also want to say thanks to Brian Tighe, who's been our behind the scenes tech person helping us out. Any final things you want to leave us with before we say goodbye?
I'm just so happy that the swan is in the shot, because I absolutely love that swan from Kerala, and I was sad it wasn't in the video. It's in one moment in the reflection of the Shiva behind the glass, but I'm so happy that you're able to show us that.
Thank you. No, you brought the galleries and the power of the sculptors to life and sort of explicated all these other meanings, and I think this was just really wonderful. So I hope everyone enjoyed it, and thank you, Aparna, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, Pujan, and thank you all for spending time. I really appreciate it. Pujan, it was lovely. I look forward to more.
Always.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you.